G'day ladies and gentlemen, ScottyD here from the Australia's Tabletop Wargaming Network, and welcome into our next installment for our series, From Sprue to Tabletop. Alrighty everyone, welcome into our next installment in our From Sprue to Tabletop series here on the ATWN, where we're continuing to paint up the Necron Warriors as a small batch of miniatures that we are currently working on to show off how you can do batch painting and how effective that is in a smaller batches that we did talk about in the previous video, as well as today's video, which we're going to be looking at the dry brushing and the tinting of the main color of the Necron Warriors. And we're going to do this in kind of two parts at the hobby desk, as well as kind of explaining both parts of the process as well. So to start off with, I'm going to do a little bit of an explanation of what dry brushing is and what the concept of it is and what you need to do for it. So dry brushing is where you basically get some paint onto a brush and basically you wipe the majority of it off the brush, and then instead of applying it normally on, as you would paint with a regular brush onto a miniature, you would actually quickly brush it back and forth over the areas of the miniature that you're wanting to paint using the dry brushing method. Now, there are a few different ways that you can actually wipe the paint off your dry brushes, and there are companies out there like Army Painter, Games Workshop, and many others out there that have got brushes specifically designed to be used for dry brushing. So it's always best to use one of those brushes if you're able to do so, or using an older brush when doing this kind of painting technique. Now, when you are wiping off the paint off your dry brushes, the main method that is suggested is always to use paper towel. However, there are a few other methods when using specific dry brushing tools, such as maybe you've created a dry brushing palette, or you can put it on some timber or some cork. There's a couple of different suggested methods out there that I'm not going to dig into too much in this video, that I know plenty of other content creators have covered the benefits and cons to those other methods as well. However, I will tell you about the effects that that does have on your painting. Now, the impact of wiping the paint off on a paper towel is that it removes a lot of the moisture from the brush compared to some of the other methods, meaning that when you actually apply the dry brushing method onto your models, it does look slightly chalky. So in some instances, like what we're doing with the Necron Warriors, for example, the effect might be completely fine for what you're going for, and that's perfect, that's awesome. Just do it that way, that's not a hassle. But if you're wanting to get a little bit of a more finer look, say for example you're wanting to try slap chop and you're doing the dry brushing to prep for that, maybe you don't want to wipe off as much paint on the paper towel as possible, or maybe look into getting some cork or some timber or one of these 3D printed, or putting together your own dry brushing palette so that you're able to actually dry brush onto plastic or resin already, so you're actually not actually losing any of the moisture out of the brush. So that's something that's completely up to you to do so. I might test that out in the future videos as well when we do eventually get to slap chop also. So now that'll be something that we look at a bit further in the future as well. So that's basically the basics of dry brushing covered. So we're actually just going to jump straight over the hobby desk now and get started with the next step of these Necron Warriors. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, so as we have mentioned at the start of the video, we are going to be working on the next stage of our Necron Warriors. As you can see, we've already got them base coated with lead belcher, ready to go after the uniform grey undercoat. Normally, as I did mention in the batch painting video, I would actually undercoat these with lead belcher. However, I did run out of that spray. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing the next layer of metallics on these guys by using dry brushing, and then we're going to look at the main tinting process that we're going to be doing for these guys in this video. So we're going to start off by doing our dry brushing to get that layer on the metallics, and what we're going to use is we're going to use an Army Painter hobby dry brush for that, and then when we get up to the wash step, we're going to use an older wash brush from Citadel, but I'm going to explain a few things around the washes as to why we're going to use that brush. So the other metallic we're going to work with is Runefang Steel as the layer paint that's going to go on top of the lead belcher, and then the primary wash we're using is the new GW shade of Drakenhof Nightshade, and we'll explain a couple of differences between this one and the previous one, in addition to also how to use this one to get a very similar effect. We're going to put the washes off to the side for what we need for the moment, and now we are going to jump into the dry brushing. So you do want to have another brush handy so you can get out some of the paint into, say, a one of these receptacle cups that we've got from our wet palette. I know it's quite bright that you can't really see that white too well, but we are going to be putting the Runefang steel into the receptacle rather than using a full wet palette for this. Metallics are one of those colors that you don't want to put onto your wet palette, as they will damage the sponge, in addition to also causing a lot of problems with the water by getting those metallic pigments into the actual paints that you're using, in addition to what you're working with. Now, I have just made a grave mistake already, which is wiping off the excess water onto my dry brushing paper towel rather than having an extra one handy. So always make sure you've got the two handy so you can wipe off your other paint brushes that you're needing. And so what we're going to do here is we are going to be grabbing our dry brush. Going to grab a decent amount of Runefang steel on there, and then we're just going to wipe off the majority, but we still want a decent amount on there, as you can see. And so then we're going to start off by grabbing one of our Necron Warriors, and we're just going to work up one leg, and we'll do both legs basically, and then we'll move up the torso. Once we've done that torso, we'll then move on to the arms and the guns, and that's basically the process. So every so often you'll refill the brush with that Runefang steel to get the brighter metallic onto the Necron Warriors here that we are working on. And slowly but surely, you'll be able to see the difference once I've just finished this leg between the two colors. So you can see that one leg, no, it's a bit harder to tell, but right now, one leg's definitely brighter. The leg's definitely brighter than the lead belcher, and that's what we want. You generally, when you're doing tinting, you want to have a brightest color for your metallics rather than a darker color, because it's a lot harder to tint darker metallics than it is to tint brighter metallics, particularly when working with shades or washes. It just allows you to get different effects. Of course, you can also use contrast paints to do your tinting as well, but we'll get into that a bit more later on in this video. But for now, we're just going to work our way through and get all of the dry brushing done on all of these Necron Warriors. Alrighty, so we've got the first one done, and you can see just with the light bouncing off, you can see how much brighter that Necron Warrior is compared to the lead belcher. So it's definitely a lot nicer of a steely metallic that we're wanting to work with the Necrons. Now, it is going to take some time to go through the other four and get them done, but generally after every model, I like to wash out my dry brush thoroughly and ensure that it's fully dry, because then that way what I'm able to do is I'm not having metallic paint cake up on the actual brush itself, but at the same time I can make sure that I've got enough paint out. I did have to get some more paint out halfway through, so that what I like to do is I like to get an initial coat down on the the dry brushing, and then I like to go back over some of the key areas once again. So the legs, the arms, the gun, and the torso and the head. I don't worry too much about the shoulder pads, because the shoulder pads do get painted orange when I'm working on my Necron color scheme. So now what we're going to do is we're going to just pretty much do the exact same process, but across all the other four Necron Warriors that we've got sitting in front of us. So, with that last Necron Warrior fully finished, we've actually, in about 30 to 35 minutes, we've actually managed to get the dry brushing of Runefang steel done across all of the 5 Necrons. And that's the power of batch painting, is that you're able to actually dedicate enough effort and time to one section of the model in this smaller batch style. So you're able to get it all done in a pretty concise way, rather than being like, oh, I'm going to get one model fully done to completion, and then I'm going to work on another model to get it fully done to completion. So what we can see is the effect that the dry brushing has actually had, and it's probably a bit hard to tell because of the shininess of it on camera, but when we do the rotator, because I'll do one for these guys at this stage as well for you guys, so you can actually see that the dry brushing actually brings out a really nice effect on the Necrons. You don't want it to be like a smooth coat, or at least I personally don't like it being a full smooth coat of Runefang steel. If I wanted that look, I would just use an airbrush to do this step and airbrush the entire Necron miniature to get it to that smooth steel look. But I like the dry brush effect because it doesn't come up fully solid, so it allows you to see a little bit of that lead belcher underneath, in addition to also having the Runefang steel being the majority on that top as well, so create some shadows, some irregularities, on the actual models, and allows the washes, when we do tint the Necron Warriors, to actually come in with a much nicer look, because it's not just a flat surface of all one color. And yes, the wash will pool in various spots when we're tinting it. It allows it to have some darker areas, some lighter areas, as well as where the washes pool a little bit and such as well. So now that we've completed the dry brushing base coat on these Necron Warriors, it's got the effect of where the Runefang steel covers the majority, or close to 90%, of the lead belcher on these Necron Warriors. However, there is still some small, very tiny areas where the lead belcher does show through, so it's able to have a little bit of depth in color when we get to the next step. So the next step for these Necron Warriors is the tinting of the main body, and this is where we're going to talk about tinting in general when it comes to metallics, particularly silvers and more neutral color metals rather than your golds, but we'll touch on that a bit as well. Now, tinting is a technique where you use a wash or a contrast style paint over a metallic paint to achieve a colored metal look. So generally it's done more over, say, a silver or a steel style of color rather than a gold, as you can actually get the desired colored metal that you're looking for better over a silver, because it's closer to white, whereas the gold is more akin to a yellow. So that's just something to bear in mind in terms of, a little bit of extra color theory there. Now, there are ways that you can go about tinting gold with different colors. However, you won't be able to get some of the same effects that you would using those washes over gold as you would when using them over silver. So there are some great washes you can use over gold for sure to get some really nice effects. I've seen purples, sepias, blacks, browns, a whole heap of different ones that I've used and seen others use as well. So definitely something that we're going to look into in the future in terms of how to use tinting for gold, but primarily for this one, we're focusing on tinting for silver. Now, when you are tinting in general, you can thin down your washes or your contrast style paints to actually reduce the saturation of the color over the silver, so you can actually get a more muted color and let the metal kind of shine through a lot more for the actual look that you're going for. Or in the other side of things, you could actually apply multiple coats of the wash or the contrast style paint to actually achieve the strength of the color that you're wanting to achieve over the metal. And that's kind of what we're going to be doing for the Necron Warriors. Now, before we swap over to the hobby desk for the next step of the Necron Warriors, when I started my Necrons, my goal was to have a great looking army without going to the same effort that I go to for my Space Marines, for example. So by utilizing a fair amount of tinting on them in general over this silver means that I use washes to actually get the majority of the work done when painting the unit, rather than having to do all the different opaque acrylics to get similar effects. So now let's jump over to the hobby desk once again and continue to work on the primary tinting step on the body of these Necrons. Alrighty, so now we are up to the next step, which is the washes using the new Drakenhof Nightshade from Citadel. And this is the main tinting process that I go through for my Necron. So as we've mentioned before, generally with shades or washes of any variety, you want to use an older brush or a dedicated wash brush. For example, this is the older Citadel painting brush range before the newer range, which their brushes actually were color coded and they were very usable, unlike the newer ones from my experience. So we're just going to grab out a whole bunch of Drakenhof Nightshade now into one of these receptacles. Now, the one thing to note is that I do actually use for my Necrons at least, I was using the old Drakenhof Nightshade, and I found that doing 2 coats of the new one got it approximately close to what the old one actually was. It was not exactly the same, but it was still close enough that it was on the mark. So we are going to just start off by grabbing this brush. Now, the good thing about this wash brush is that it's quite long, so it can hold a decent amount of the wash in there, but it's got a nice point on it, which means we can get into those areas. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to start off by liberally applying the Drakenhof Nightshade all over the main body of the Necron Warriors. Now, we do want to be careful around the gun, if and where possible, just so that we're able to not necessarily get any blue in places where we don't necessarily want it. And you can already see that as we're doing it over the metallics for the Necron Warrior here, it is tinting it to the blue spectrum. Well, we're obviously using a blue wash here, and it is tinting it, but at the same time, because the wash is a darker wash, we're not actually losing a lot of the brightness from the silver on the underside. Now, the important thing when you are doing your washes over an entire miniature or a specific area is you do want to make sure that you're able to get right into all the different areas where you do need to apply the wash, but you also want to make sure that you're doing it accurately without causing any other issues that you might want to face. So obviously we don't want the washes to cause connections between different areas of the model. We don't want it to pull as much in certain spots where it doesn't make sense for there to be shadows and such. And so we're just going to slowly work our way around. And the good thing about doing this in batches is because shades or washes do take a little bit to dry, what it allows for is that as we do the first coat across all of these guys, after we finish the first coat on the last guy, the first coat on the first guy should actually be dry, so we can actually hit it with the second coat in relatively quick succession. And that's really the strength of batch painting, is that it'll allow you to do different steps in rapid succession in doing the tinting process like we are doing here for these Necron Warriors. And so we're just going to keep on working our way around. Now, we do want to avoid the center crest as well, as we are going to tint that a bit of a different color, as well as the shoulder pads, which we will not shoulder pads, the shoulder blades on there. It's not too much of an issue if we get the wash on there, but at the same time, if we can try and be neat and avoid it if and where possible, it will just reduce the amount of touch-ups that we need to do for this process. Now, the good thing also is that by doing it with washes, I can actually go back in and actually just pick up the majority of the wash that's sitting there. So then I only have to go over with a light coat of Drakenhof Nightshade onto the areas that have been hit with it that we want to do a different color. So as we just move through, we're going to make sure that we hit some of the more visible areas underneath as well. And it's just really a process of you making sure that you're hitting every area of the miniature that you're needing to hit. And then once you've hit that area, allowing it to dry, and then we'll come back and we'll hit it once another time afterwards as well, because we'll see what the first coat looks like at the end as well, and compare it to one that I've done previously. But what I can tell you is definitely you're going to want to do 2 coats of the new Drakenhof Nightshade if you're wanting to match it to, or get it close to, the older Drakenhof Nightshade. So we're almost done this, guy, so we're just going to walk through the rest of the arms. Now, around the handles, this is where the tip of the wash brush is going to come in nice and handy, because we're going to be able to get into some of these cracks and crevices, whilst also not getting it on the actual weapon itself that we are going to be washing in a different color. So, and then some of these spots are going to be quite difficult to get into. So sometimes you do have to just bite the bullet and allow the brush to do the work. But other times, just doing the best that you can and trying to not have the overflow onto various areas as well. Now, this spot right here, this handle, is probably the biggest culprit for that. I generally don't touch it up either. I just do the black over the top when we get to doing the black washes as well. But if you wanted to touch it up, you can definitely add that step. We will be doing a touch-up video to just show you how I approach touch-ups after doing washes, depending on the severity of the washes. Well, not the severity of the washes, the severity of the touch-ups, as well as the amount that we're needing to do. And so we have, I believe, just finished that first coat of the Drakenhof Nightshade on this Necron Warrior. Just making sure a few more spots are hit where I know they're going to need to be hit. And just up and around the back here as well. And so that result, it's really tinted that metallic, and you can see the comparison between the actual tinted blue and the standard Runefang steel, because the standard Runefang steel is quite bright still on the camera, but then you've got the darker areas which have got that Drakenhof Nightshade in there as well. The one thing you will also need to be careful of is just making sure that you don't touch any areas that are still drying as you are handling the miniatures, like I've just done. So something you can do is just go back in, make sure it's all touched back up so it's fine. All right, so as that dries, we're going to move on to doing the first coat on the other 4. Then we're going to come back to that guy, and then we're going to do the second coat and get these guys done in a relatively quick succession that the washes do allow us to tint metallics with. And you'll be able to see once we've done the main Drakenhof Nightshade wash what I was talking about between the different tonalities, in addition to also having the different depths within the model with the layering that the dry brushing actually applies onto the metal as well. So we're going to jump into the second one and we'll go from there. So with that slight cleanup done on that last Necron Warrior, in less than half an hour, we've actually been able to get all 5 of them fully washed. Now, as you can see, we've got the blue fully done on these guys. Actually, I'll flip this over to give you a little bit of perspective. It's a little bit desaturated, but we'll show it a bit better. Now, this is a Scorpic Destroyer Lord that I've done previously, and the comparison between the 2 washes is actually that the older Drakenhof actually gets it in 1 coat, whereas the newer Drakenhof Nightshade really doesn't have as much depth to it. So you can still see quite a bit of the brightness coming through in comparison. And so what we're actually going to do is, this is the main reason why we're going to add a second coat on all of these Necron Warriors to get them down in terms of their darkness. And so it'll take us about half an hour again to get these guys done. So really, after we've done the dry brushing, that took us about half an hour, and the tinting, which takes us about an hour, really, we're looking at about, you know, an hour and a half working time to get these guys actually to a really, really decent spot in terms of painting. So we're just going to start working around once again. And this is where, you know, as I was saying, the benefit of batch painting is that we were able to pretty much start this first miniature again straight away, because the other miniature, you know, going through all 5 allowed us to actually give this one enough drying time so that it was able to actually fully dry, and then we're able to get a nice solid coat of the Drakenhof Nightshade to really tint the blue to where we are wanting it to be at for the Necron. So we're just going to go through now, and we're going to do this second coat across all of them. All right. And so with that second coat done, it took us a little bit less time, about 20 minutes that time. So in total, we've actually only done about an hour 20 worth of work. So that's 80 minutes total, which means currently per model, you're at 16 minutes to do the dry brushing and the 2 layers of washes. And that's really some of the power of the batch painting in small batches, is that allows you to get them done relatively quickly, as I mentioned in the previous video. So as you can see, that blue is a lot more defined now, which is great, because when you compare it to the definition on the blue of the older you know, Drakenhof Nightshade, it's a lot closer, even a bit darker, but I actually like it a bit darker, because before that it was a bit too light. So I actually quite like it a lot darker in these guys as well. So we're going to let them dry. And yeah, so that is the first kind of part of the tinting that you go through. Now you can do more layers of tinting if you want to. It depends on how much you want the metallics to show through. In addition, you can do this with any other color of wash or shade. It just really depends on the medium, what color you're looking to try and achieve. But in addition to that, also how bright you want the metallics to show through from the underside. Do you want it a deeper metallic so it's, you know, not as showing, or do you want it to to be like a light color over the top, so the metallic does show through a lot. You can do the same kind of process with contrast paints as well, doing the same thing, applying the contrast over the metallics as well to get metallic contrast. And yeah, really great technique. I love the effect that the tinting has on the Necron Warriors, particularly for the main body, and then we accent from there, add in other colors and such as well, and get these guys to a nice battle-ready tabletop standard as well. Alrighty, so now that we've actually finished the second coat of Drakenhof Nightshade on these Necron Warriors, that's actually this stage of the tinting process done for painting up these Necron Warriors, which is great. So the total time we've actually spent so far from undercoating to getting the tinting on the main bodies done for these Necron Warriors is actually about 2.5 hours if you include the undercoating and painting the lead belcher on, which actually equates to about half an hour's worth of work time on each miniature in the batch, which really shows off the effect that batch painting can have on your hobby progress, particularly when doing something along the lines of doing a lot of metallic tinting and using washes to do the work for you rather than painting with opaque acrylics. So by being able to get these Necron Warriors done in, you know, maybe 5 hours, we get them done. That means we've worked on them for about an hour per model, which is really time efficient, which is great. Now, of course, different size models will vary on that for the Necrons for sure. But now the total time we've actually spent on these Necron Warriors so far from undercoating to the stage that they're at right now is actually about 2.5 hours worth of work if you include the undercoating step as well as painting on the lead belcher base coat instead of using the undercoat on there. Probably added about maybe 50 minutes or so in there as well. So when you break it down, it actually equates to about half an hour per model of working time, which really shows off the time saving and the benefits of doing small batches when you are painting your miniatures, when you're wanting to get a lot of models done in relatively quick succession and you're wanting to see progress as you're going and have completion as you're going through the steps as well. So I dare say with these Necron Warriors, we may be able to get them fully done between 4 and 5 hours worth of work time total, which is anywhere between 45 to an hour's worth of work per 5 models as well, which is really great to see. And that is where we're going to leave the Necron Warriors for now. I'm going to pick them up in our next video as we continue on in this series. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, well, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you did enjoy learning a bit more about the dry brushing technique for painting, as well as going through and tinting your models over silver. And we're going to have a bit more tinting discussion going into the next video, as well as we look at some different elements of tinting with different colors and seeing the different effects for your miniatures and the metallics that you're wanting to use on them as well. If you didn't enjoy this video, feel free to leave a comment down below, leave a like on the video as well. And if you want to catch more content here from us here at the ATWN, feel free to hit that subscribe button, turn on that notification bell, so you'll be notified as to when we are creating more content here on the YouTube side of things. And if you have any questions at all and you don't feel like asking us here on YouTube, that's okay. Feel free to come and find us where we're generally live over on Twitch at AstralisTWN, and you can ask your questions there when we're doing hobbying sessions, or we might be doing a variety of different things, say tournament coverage, ITC South Pacific snapshots, or tournament previews for coverage we are about to do as well. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.